consultation workshop as we advance towards the development of the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Policy Roadmap, an initiative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean and the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, with the support of UNESCO's Information for All program. We spare a thought for our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and those in the Eastern Caribbean, some of whom were intending to join us this afternoon, but will not be able to do so. And we thank those who, despite the dislocations in that region, have been participating. We had 2 earlier sessions and had a good representation from the Eastern Caribbean, and I see as well on this call that there are persons from that area. It then gives me great pleasure to now introduce a great supporter of this initiative and the advisor for communication and information at the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, Isabel Vera.
Thank you, Cordell. Thank you for your kind introduction. Good day, good afternoon. On behalf of the United Nations Cultural Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, thanks you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Our thoughts are with the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in these difficult times for them. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you that have been with us before, as well as those who are new to the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Initiative. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously are devoting your time to contributing to this important process. In particular, we would like to thank the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, its Executive Director, Mr. Cordell Green, and his colleagues and team for putting this event together and allowing it to become a success. Today marks our 3rd year since the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean approved a specific work plan to start working directly on artificial intelligence matters in the Caribbean. And we are proud to have advanced and learned so much during this process and be able to be celebrating this workshop today. The rapid introduction and uptake of artificial intelligence give it a great potential to address some of the most pressing development issues of the Caribbean small island developing states. At the same time, however, it can cause other disruptive socioeconomic effects. This leads to the need of putting in place plans and policies that addresses the role, the impact, and ethics behind AI in relation to Caribbean states that are faced with specific developing challenges and vulnerabilities. In today's gathering, we will focus on discussing and collecting your ideas, inputs, suggestions, and comments as regards to the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Draft Policy Roadmap. The document, which has been shared with you previous to our meeting to facilitate the discussions, is based on the research conducted by BCJ as well as on the outputs from the online activities conducted since December 2020. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time and will rather leave as much time as possible for the interesting and important discussions that will take place today and that will contribute to enriching and to fine-tune the draft policy roadmap. This is an important step for the Caribbean. I am sure that today we'll all enjoy a fruitful, engaging, and enriching meeting. A very warm welcome again to each and every one of you, and a big thanks for engaging with UNESCO and BCJ in this effort. Thank you.
Well, better I go sleep so I can have some energy for this test.
No, not yet. It's been a week since you got me and I have a question.
Aren't you the built-in assistant? You're here to help me.
I just want to know where I come from. The other machines around the house said I'm AI, but I'm not sure what that means.
I was just reading up on that, you know. You're lucky to have me guiding you.
Oh, I definitely am. So tell me more about this AI.
Well, iBot, artificial intelligence or AI has many definitions. But in a nutshell, it is about machines that can learn and make decisions that would normally be left to humans. Most of us humans use it in our everyday lives. Once we have a smart device like a phone or a tablet, chances are we're using AI. Remember how I searched for a dress earlier, and by the time I go on Instagram, I saw ads for shoes to go with it. Yep, that's AI.
So we are involved in everything. I'm worried though. Smart Stove told me that AI could do bad things like take away jobs from humans and make wrong decisions that hurt you. I can't believe we'd ever do that.
Ah, yes, that can sometimes be true. For example, sometimes AI will make decisions like denying a loan or medical attention based on gender, race, or even where a person lives. This is what we call algorithmic bias. But it is humans who created AI, and we must ensure we provide you with the right information so you can make better decisions and not discriminate against people based on their race, gender, and things like that. When we give you the correct programming and rules to help you make right decisions, we're practicing what's known as AI ethics. We can't leave everything up to you, like me getting shoe suggestions after searching for the dress. Yes, I wanted shoes, but sometimes when AI collects information about people, they don't know it is happening and what the information is being used for. This invades our privacy, and not everyone is so welcoming of their information being used unless they give their permission.
Oh wow! This is good to know as a new bot. So, no matter how smart we become, humans should always have a say about our decisions, right?
Yes, iBot, the AI in you mimics the human brain, but it can never be human and have human emotions.
I am learning so much from you. Tell me more.
Think of AI as your family members, robots and hardware devices on your mom's side, and software-based operations like voice assistants from your father's side, and data would be like your cousins. So let's see. Here in the Caribbean, we can use your family in agriculture. A farmer can be in his house and use AI to check on livestock and crops. He can monitor food and water intake for his cattle, keep track of livestock's health, and look for diseases even before severe symptoms appear. Gather data to look at fertilization and water quality. Get information about plant diseases and plant or soil deficiencies with 98% effectiveness using only pictures. All these things improve crop yields and help produce healthier livestock. And then even healthcare. You know I want to be a doctor, right? So this is my area. The other day when Dudley was fiddling with his watch, you know it's his blood pressure monitor he was checking? Yes! Things like smartwatches can check your heart rate and pressure levels. Can you imagine what doctors can do with that real-time info? How they can help people? Plus, I also read that when doctors work with AI, it makes operations 98% accurate. Can you believe that?
Wow! This is exciting. I love that we can collaborate with humans for good.
The other day, Mr. Williams, who runs the supermarket, told me that his AI tools told him to restock 500 banana chips, but he was thinking to change brands, so he only got 200 until the new shipment arrived. Now, AI wouldn't have known that, so it's always good when us humans and you AI work together.
We were talking for so long. It's now way past the usual bedtime. I think we can pause for tonight.
Ha! Look how you learned my bedtime. That is AI.
Of course, that was not meant for most of you on this call, but only to signal to you that we understand that as we discuss artificial intelligence, one of the most pressing needs is the information asymmetry which exists, and the need for us to create materials such as that video and more and better ones to share with people, to lift the level of awareness about the presence of AI in our lives and the closer acquaintance of human beings with artificial intelligence and the human centricity principle that should guide us in that relationship. That was the point of the video, which has been created by the Broadcasting Commission, supported by UNESCO, as an illustration of the content that we will need to create more of. So the creatives who are part of this discussion, that really is a call for action. Now it gives me a great pleasure to hand over to the dynamic and multifaceted Erica Simmons, who is here today in wearing her hat as, well, I'll just mention two hats: Executive Director of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing at the Caribbean Maritime University. And she's also the chairwoman of the IEEE chapter in Jamaica. And Erica will be leading the workshop. Over to you, Erica.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. We're after 12 now. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with you. And we have some exciting discussions to talk about today. There we go. Get this up.
And this is your third back-to-back session. Let me just say that for the record.
It is. And I would like to also point out, Mr. Green, that all of these sessions have been just so well attended. And I'm really happy to share what we have with the almost 30 people that we have on the line today. So thank you very much. I want to share with you the outcome of our policy consultations that we have done over the last few months. Starting in December of 2020, we've had a series of consultations, and I wanted to share with you today our policy roadmap that has been developed for the Caribbean. I'm going to invite you to give feedback, and I'm hoping that you will. We want this to be a very active session. So we're going to give you two ways to be able to interact with us. As we go through the roadmap, we will pause periodically after we get through talking about each important point and allow you to either raise your hand and talk and have a verbal comment. We're welcoming that. And we'll also have a link that we'll share with you in the chat so that you can share passively. So if you don't want to talk, you can also share using the form. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our results of our roadmap. But before, I want to share with you some assumptions that came out of our discussions. And really, we used these assumptions when we were creating our roadmap, our framework, and our principles. The very first one is that human creativity is inextricably linked with our Caribbean identity, our economic viability, and our sustainable development. It's something that is core to us. Our human creativity. We want to also say that AI is a product of human creativity, right? And that AI is transformative. We also went in with the assumption that AI is an industry in itself, And it's a technology that is going horizontal across various industry sectors. The consultations came back that we wanted AI in the Caribbean to be inclusive, fair, transparent, and accountable. We thought that AI should be regulated in some form and have governance, and you'll see a whole section of that in our roadmap. We wanted to make sure that everyone knew that in our region that AI is not eligible for human rights and AI can never supersede our human rights. We acknowledged as well that artificial intelligence is a very, very important general purpose technology of our century. And because of that, our region really needed to pay attention to that. We noted as well that many people said that we are our data and data should be owned by us. But we also noted that bias is everywhere in artificial intelligence, and that has been proven and backed up by the many examples that we have of AI creating bias situations. It had even been said that data rights will be the civil rights of our 21st century. So how we own data, who has rights to our data, will be something that we will fight over in the future. We also acknowledge that we have to have broadband access. There's some important infrastructure that we need to even be in this game, and that we need new education and training. So those were some high-level assumptions that came out in our consultations, and we took those and went into creating our framework. So we have a framework here which has principles. We rested on 6 principles for resiliency, governance, transformation, upskilling and preservation, and sustainability. Out of those principles came some action areas, some guidelines, which allowed us to attain some of the objectives that we were seeking in the region. So we are going to go line item by line item on each one of these principles and have a deeper discussion. And it's during that discussion that I invite you, please, to have a very interactive session with us, with me. Give us your feedback. I'm only the scribe in this process. I will be capturing all the notes and making sure that we can definitely integrate them into our paper. But this paper is our paper, so your feedback's very important. Okay, so let's go look at our 6 principles that we resided on, that we came to from our policy consultations, from looking at some of the UNESCO best practices, for reviewing these types of roadmaps that were going on around the world. We came up with these 6 principles: resiliency, governance, transformation, upskilling, preservation, which is one that I will note that is not appearing in any of the documents that I'm seeing thus far. So this particular principle could be a unique principle that we are putting forth from the Caribbean. And of course, sustainability in terms of our sustainable development goals. So here are the 6 areas. I am going to go through each one of these one by one, but I invite you right now, if you do have any opinions, if we left anything off of our top level principles, is there something that we totally missed? Let us know. We want to make sure that we get your feedback. But we are going to go on and talk about each one of these in a little bit more granular detail so that you can determine exactly what we're talking about. Okay, our very first principle has to do with resiliency. And when we talk about resiliency, I want you to think about our climate change challenges that we have here in our region and how we can use AI to assist with our resiliency and our climate change. And we have a couple of important guides under this area, or areas for action, which includes disaster mitigation, resource management. How do we talk about managing data specifically to climate, to our unique climate in the region? And then how do we use that data to do things like predictive analytics so that we can mitigate risk, minimize our economic exposure to climate change. So just some ideas of areas that we can begin to implement programs and policies around disaster mitigation. In one of our earlier consultations, we noted that there is a resiliency framework that we have in the Caribbean. We're going to take a look at that and see how we can share that a little bit more broadly in this area. There was a really good discussion on all of the post-event protocols that AI could potentially assist with in our communications around disasters, in our security, and in our media recovery. We can only think about what's happening in St. Vincent right now and what's happening to our brothers and sisters there. It's a great case study to determine how we could implement AI to help with that disaster that's happening right now. We have lots of resources in our region. We have wonderful things that we can do to monitor our oceans, our rivers. We've got a number of ports in our region that could be used as resources. We want to determine how we use AI to potentially survey our road terrain, to help with mitigating our disasters, to help with evacuation points. Do we have those properly identified? How are we going to deal with potable water after our disasters, getting our infrastructure back up in place, our healthcare facilities? We're thinking that AI could certainly be used for rationalization, mobilization, and allocation of these resources that we have to deal with and to increase our resiliency. We have lots of data. We've been collecting data about our storms, about our droughts. There's data about our volcanoes in the region. How do we then clean and classify that data and make that data available in a structured format or in some other unstructured way, make it available for artificial intelligence to be able to utilize it, to be able to gain insights, to be able to look for efficiencies in those systems, in the data, because there's knowledge in the data that we may not be able to find as humans in our examination of the data. But obviously we know that AI systems are masterful at crunching gigabytes of data at one time. So could we load our system up with our data in a structured format and allow our AI systems to do predictive analytics? So monitor our reefs, for example, to be able to find pollution, to look at our rainfall levels, and also, as I said, to be able to see how we can monitor or even predict natural disasters such as volcanoes and hurricanes. The deliverables out of this area, we're looking to save lives. We're looking to minimize our risk and economic exposure to these events. We are looking to improve our responsiveness. How can we help in the most efficient way our brothers and sisters down in St. Vincent? How can we get them back up? How do we assure that we have food security? We have all of the infrastructure that we need to get back up, and how do we use data and information to do that? This is the resiliency section. I'll stop now and ask you to both comment verbally by raising your hand and also passively by inputting into our collection form. Resiliency is one of our key principles that we want to be able to make sure that AI is focused on. Let's see, who's assigned to my session this time? I think Sasha, are you assigned?
I'm here.
You're here. Okay, Sasha, any questions in the chat so far?
We're not seeing any comments or questions so far.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you to use the form though. Please give us some passive comments. We will keep going. We have 6 areas to go through. So we'll have some other time for some discussion. But I would like to point to you the areas in red are feedback that we had from some of our other sessions. I've been trying to capture it as we go along so that you can see the new items that were added just today. Okay, so governance is a huge area. It's a big area. It's an area that is on every single AI roadmap, policy recommendation that I've seen globally from every region. And it really is concerning about how we're going to govern AI. And I know in the region, we are very sensitive to the fact that we need AI for our growth and development. But we don't want to put too many boundaries around AI such that it stifles innovation. So we really need to focus on our governance of AI and make sure that we can have really strong governance principles. So this is what we came out with in the discussion. Ethics is a principle in governance that every one of these roadmaps are talking about. As a region, we need to develop common values and principles. We have some already, we already have some, but how do we aggregate those up into a roadmap for the region? I have listed some here. I think we need to do some more work. We'll need to continue to build on this roadmap that we are presenting. We have should we consider setting up national and regional artificial intelligence offices? These are offices that have experts in the area of artificial intelligence. Nationally, I have someone to go to when I'm talking. I need advice. I need some best practice. I have a place to go to. I don't know if there's a particular place in each of our countries that is specifically focused on artificial intelligence. If you do have a place in one of your countries, just please drop it in the chat so that we can be aware. Huge area in this area of AI, and it's unfortunate that technology is just moving so fast that standards are normally, we're seeing that come after the technology has been created and deployed. And because we don't have a lot of standards governing the creation of these technologies, this is where we can come into some major problems. So we are advocating that we have standards. It could be global standards, a combination of global best practices as well as our local standards that we want to promote that would be offered to people that are working in AI. We could potentially develop a technical code of conduct for developers that are working on solutions for our region. And I do want to note in the paper, I have a small call out about the software development industry. And I wanted to tell you that it's amazing that that industry is responsible for creating such powerful technology. However, we don't see a lot of the regulation. We don't see a lot of the licensing. We don't see a lot of the codes of conduct that we have in some of the other industries. So I'll give you a great example. In the medical industry, you have to pass a test to become a doctor, right? In the medical industry, we have the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm to people, right? And it's drilled into everybody that operates in the industry. We need a technical code of conduct for the software industry because anyone at this point can develop an AI solution and sell it and deploy it. So as a software industry overall, I know that we're looking for better ways to govern our activity in the industry. Some of the other things that we can do is to develop procurement guidelines. And this can be for both private and public sector to give you some ideas of the things that you need to ask for. For example, we have a trend now in the industry where they are requiring training data sheets. So we have data sheets for other products that we have in industry that lists, what's in the product, how was it made? And we're advocating that we have data sheets in the AI industry. And if we put that mandate inside of our procurement guideline, we would allow our buyers to be able to ask for that, because they may not know to ask for a data sheet. We also want to develop maybe very specific principles about the humanistic design of AI in the region and the principles associated with that. The UNESCO guidelines are very, very clear on the humanistic development of artificial intelligence. Humans have to be a part of it. We have to actually be in the center of the design of the system. So we might need some AI design principles for the region. I'm a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. It's one of the largest professional bodies and standards bodies in the world. And we are also trying out of that organization to develop some very important standards as it relates to artificial intelligence. And we have just launched a series of a P7000 series of standards that has to do all with artificial intelligence and the development of these systems throughout their life cycle. So there will be a standard on training and what we need to be able, what a developer needs to be able to provide as a part of its training information. So we need to stay close to these standards bodies because they're coming up with some best practices that we could deploy and use in our region. Standards will be very important to make sure that we have boundaries around our artificial intelligence and also AI that is either created or deployed in the region. It needs to stand up to an international standard. We have to have quality products coming into our region and coming out of our region. Okay, this next area, and I'm seeing the chat blow up, so this is good. I'm looking forward to it. Let me get through this, and we're going to take your questions and your comments. Legislation is another important area. Unfortunately, because of the harms that AI has been doing around the world and the biases in AI, many countries around the world are looking to develop legislation around artificial intelligence. And here in the Caribbean, we need a framework. And for everything in this plan, I want us to be thinking 10 years in advance. There might be some things in this plan that might be futuristic, and you're like, Erica, we're not even there yet. But really, we're trying to look in a really strategic way about what could potentially happen and develop some shields against that. So we have to develop a framework. We need a long-term policy. We need regulations around AI. Now, the other thing was introduction of laws. And this was a very important concept because, again, we don't want to constrain the development of AI in the region. We want to make sure that we have as much innovation in the region, but we have to control AI. So there has been a proposal that we in the region develop some soft and potentially hard laws to address AI harms, responsibility, liability, and our rights. There are already some introductory points already, some policies already are out there created that we could bolster up with some of this AI language. We don't have to create, in some cases, we don't have to create new policy. We just need to make sure that we are addressing AI in those policies. One policy is our ICT policy that we have in the region. Every country has an ICT policy. Every country has a data policy, privacy policy. But what we want to do is to make sure that we have some very specific words around artificial intelligence and that we identify even some of the risk. So there are already instruments that we have in the region that we could tie into. And again, this is just trying to cut the time frame that we need, our response time, because we don't have a lot of time to noodle on this too much because the technology is moving. By the time we noodle on something and decide, it's changed. So we have to find these touch points within our existing industry and policies that we can integrate this in. We need new financial instruments and legislation around that, digital currency, digital money, and I will also add right here out of one of our other policy sessions that we need to figure out our financial strategy in deploying AI. There will be some low-hanging fruit items that we can deal with financially, in country. And there'll be some other really big things like infrastructure, which we'll discuss in some subsequent slides, that really probably needs a more integrated approach because of the cost. So we'll talk about that in a minute. We need to make sure that we enshrine AI for good as a human right, and we'll talk about that in our sustainability section a little bit further. In the area of transparency, explainability, and accountability, we want to potentially create a standards body that can aggregate and evaluate and approve maybe the deployment of AI in the public sector, for example. We need corporate responsibility education campaigns. So even for our private and public sector, we need to educate people on their responsibility with artificial intelligence, making sure that data is secure, that we are protecting the privacy of people, and that we are not violating any human rights by implementing AI. We also want to look at how we're implementing AI to protect our privacy and security. So and increase our data security. We talked about a couple of breaches that happened to systems in the Caribbean. So how would we apply AI to potentially find those breaches, find those vulnerabilities before they get exposed? And we need to figure out a way really how to build trust among Caribbean citizens with the deployment of this technology. I'm going to go through the next slide and then we can discuss this whole section of governance. Safety and well-being, equity, and advocacy are the three following areas. So under safety and well-being, governance. How do we employ governance to make sure that we are safe from any destructive nature of AI? So potentially we have an opportunity because of our diversity, our racial diversity, our linguistic diversity, our cultural diversity, to develop AI to test for biases. So that could be a way that we are preemptively protecting our safety and well-being. There's a whole industry. This is a new job. This is a new area that is coming up, a new job, not previously deployed, where we could develop AI bias tests. We also need to identify the applications of AI that are in the most need of governance. There'll be a continuum, right? For example, AI in the judicial system. Now, are we going to allow AI, for example, to do things like, bring research to lawyers and different types of legal professionals? Or are we going to allow AI to make decisions on sentencing? Are we going to allow AI to make decisions on parole and releases? So we have to create some boundaries about where we need AI governance. I would say the medical industry is another one that we probably need to determine how and where we want AI to assist. And all of this is, of course, to make sure that we can defend our human rights. We can make sure that AI doesn't cross the line, that we have some boundaries. There's a whole section about AI for justice reform and law enforcement reform. We need to also develop a dispute resolution system in the region. So if AI harms somebody in the region, who do we sue? How do we have our recourse as people in the region? And maybe that might mean looking at manual override buttons. I'm not sure, but these are the types of things that we have to think about. How are we going to make sure that we're safe and govern the use of AI? The whole argument about equity is important too. We need quality high-speed internet and broadband access, and quality is actually the key word here, because in the Caribbean, we're still implementing 2G and 3G technology, and we're actually to 5G technology right now. So it means that we're having different quality of broadband access throughout our region. And we may want to think about how we standardize that so everybody gets a base level of service. That's going to enable access to technology, and it's going to enable us to target some really important populations, such as women, youth, and disabled populations. How do we make the system equitable so that they have access to this? How do we enable equitable machine learning algorithms that could help in this area of equity? And advocacy, what we're doing here today and have done over the last several months in this AI for the Caribbean initiative is really to advocate that we need to stand up, that we need to engage in the global discourse around AI, because there's a lot of discussions going on globally. We need to promote our regional networks and establish regional networks that could then participate in our global networks related to AI. We thought about bringing the knowledge and the expertise to the Caribbean. Who doesn't want to come to the Caribbean and visit the Caribbean? We have a wonderful product to sell our region. Can we bring an international developers conference here to the region, bring people here so they understand we have unique scenarios, unique circumstances here in the region, and also just bring the awareness to the region that AI and artificial intelligence is a big deal. We want to lobby the big tech. There's about 6 or 7 masters of AI around the world. They've already gone down the road with them. How do we get the Facebooks and the Googles, the Tencents and the Baidus to the table to come and work with us, to say that we have a unique position in AI and we want to collaborate. We want to be a part of whatever solutions that you're doing, that you're putting forth. And I want to say that in doing the literature review and doing the research, we don't have a lot of papers being written in this area. We don't have a lot of academic expertise. So we need to see how we can develop more academic papers to show that we're in the conversation. We are interested in this. There's probably less than 10. When you do a search on AI in the Caribbean, this UNESCO initiative will be the #1 thing that comes up, which is great, which means that we're having advocacy, but we need to do more work here globally. We need to be writing more about that. We need to participate in global forums, and we need to develop responsible AI training and policies. Okay, that was a lot. I'm going to stop here now. I see the chat's been blowing up. Sasha, what's people been talking about in the chat?
It's been quite vibrant in the chat, actually. A lot of discussions around hard versus soft law. So the idea of a code of conduct, should it be something that is a strict code, or should it be more like guidelines? And that discussion also has to take place in the context of the impacts that might have for innovation and competition in the region. Before I continue to summarize, I see that Lindell has raised his hand. So I'll let you go ahead.
Good afternoon, all. Thanks, Erica, for your presentations. Just 2 quick notes. One, I think I'm settled in hearing you saying that to a large extent, AI is going to depend on new technologies, such as the 5G technology. Am I correct? All right. So in light of the fact that AI has this thrust and this platform to ride on, to what extent is there some kind of a coordination between the UNESCO operatives that are marshalling this AI drive with other international bodies, ITU related, that is also focused on other technology platforms which may serve as complements to AI? Okay, that's one question. And the second question would be in relation to your concept of harm. How is that defined?
I don't think that we have a real hard definition right now. We need to come to what that definition is for the region. We're talking about harm where you're taking away economic opportunity from people, you're excluding people, you are causing physical harm to people. You are also, for example, using AI in a way that would be competitively disadvantaged for people. So we actually have to develop our definition for harm globally. Those are the areas that the rest of the countries are focused on. Harm in terms of barring someone, harm physically, harm economically. Those are the ones that we have, but for our region, we need to zero down on what that means. We need to come up with a common set of
the opposite of the SDGs. And I would imagine too, anything that would undermine the sustainable development goals, if you think about poverty, decent work. And one of the interesting things in the SDGs is Goal 8, which talks about decent work being inclusive of full and productive employment by 2030. I mean, that in itself requires a lot of interrogation for how AI would be applied to and its implications for the labor force.
Yeah. Yes, and I see that Isabel has her hand raised as well. So we'll take your comment at this time.
Yes, thank you. So about the question about how is UNESCO relating with other UN agencies, well, UNESCO is taking a multi-stakeholder approach for all the issues dealing with artificial intelligence. We are internally in UNESCO, you know that UNESCO has mandate, a specific mandate for 5 areas of work, including education, the sciences, culture, and communication and information. So internally, we do ensure the coherence between the work that all these different sectors are doing. And then as regards to our family agencies in the UN system, we also have this strong coordination to approach the different issues of artificial intelligence. We don't have a formal mechanism so far, but we are taking the first steps to doing so. And also, well, of course, we liaise with governments and civil society and the different organizations at the regional and national level here in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I think I can go back to Erica now to wrap up and take us to our next.
Great, thank you, Sasha. Thank you so much for that too, Isabel. I'll just comment on, I think once we get our game plan in place and we recognize that broadband and our infrastructure is an important for us for our future. As a region, we can then go and work with our stakeholders like UNESCO to ask for their assistance, to ask for connections to other organizations within UNESCO that could help us. I think the broadband issue, our infrastructure issue, is actually one of those issues that we should be collaboratively going forward and asking for the help of UNESCO and the ITU, for example.
If we may just take one final comment, I see that Jason Scott has his hand raised. Please proceed.
Hi, everyone. Afternoon. I want to thank everyone. Hi, Erica. Nice to see you again. Just want to raise something really quick, which always comes up in discussion like this. Just want to be very clear around the separation of concern between using AI in governance and governing AI, because you might end up in a constant feedback loop where you want to apply AI to something, but then end up biting yourself in the tail. So if it is that we could, at a high level, at least agree in several principles, in principle, like we would want, AI to be, human-centered, to not disadvantage any, to have high-level agreements before we then go ahead and look at the various applications of AI, because AI it's far reaching. It spans several industries. So if we make any broad strokes or sweeping, assumptions, it may affect other people, favorably or unfavorably. So the main thing I'd want us to take away when it comes to governing AI is that big, nice red line. I think that should be the top thing. Enshrine AI as good for human rights. So it should always be enabling human rights. And then after we all agree on how AI would affect human rights, we can look at, using it to better the lives of other humans. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Jason, as well. And I wanted to say that I started out this discussion by saying that we have to develop common principles and values as to what our AI is and it means for us in the region. I would say that these are recommendations that we can start with. These are areas that have come out of our consultations, but I totally agree with you. We have to have a common definition of where we want to govern, where we want governance in AI and how AI is going to govern. And we talked about as well, creating a list of application areas that we want to look at, low-hanging fruit areas where we do want governance. For example, I talked about the justice system, talked about medicine potentially as being some areas where we want to look at putting some boundaries, some governance, specific governance in those sectors. But completely agree with you. And AI for good is one of the principles that did come out in the region. We'll talk a little bit more about that in our area for sustainability. Any other comments, Sasha? Okay, we'll keep going for now. Sasha, you're on mute if you're talking.
Yes, we can continue.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the third area that we came up with was to use artificial intelligence for the transformation of the region, the digital transformation of the region. And there are two areas here that I think that we need to focus on. The private sector has always been implementing artificial intelligence in some way or another because it speaks to their efficiency, right? They're always about saving costs and making money. So AI is totally a technology that they should be looking at and are looking at. And it's being implemented in various industry sectors here in the Caribbean. But the public sector now is lagging. And I believe if we focus on public sector digital transformation, we will not only gain greater efficiency of these systems that we have in the region in terms of our citizen services, we are going to create new jobs for both the private sector that wants to come and help us implement in these areas, and we're going to be creating new skill sets for important categories of people. So if we think about what needs to happen in the public sector, how do we want to interact with our government? We want to push for the transformation, and we want to introduce efficiency programs using artificial intelligence in the area of crime, in the area of education, in our health, and in our energy sector. And I think we have to push our public sector to begin to implement some of these solutions. We want paperless data integration. A lot of our processes are still manual and on paper, and actual physical piece of paper is a very analog thing. It doesn't have a lot of intelligence into it that way. But if we transform paper into digital, we then get to extract intelligence from it. So we need to look at reducing the use of paper, even going to a place where we can just set up simple forms, simple ways that we're collecting information. We need to support our IoT innovation, which is our Internet of Things integration. We talk about smart islands, we talk about smart island infrastructure, but we really need to look at how we're going to do that. We need to initiate strategic alliances, both within the region, in country, in the region, and globally. And we need to make sure that we can enable public and private partnerships so that we can get our internet infrastructure set up. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Smart Island infrastructure in a minute. Let's look at just some simple public sector efficiency programs. And I'm sure a lot of people that have worked in the public sector says, oh, Erica, we've been doing those programs forever. We do those. I want you to look at these transformation programs with the eye of artificial intelligence, this new transformative technology, right? And I want you to look at the future. What you've done in the past is sort of obsolete, but what you can do is to look at how you build on where you have been using this technology, because AI is going to be is going to give you scale. It's going to give you efficiency and scale that you've never had. So in some public sector efficiency programs, how can we implement AI, for example, in this very important area of patent and trademark examination? We are going to be suggesting that we need to enable a new generation of innovators in the region. And what we cannot have is have a patent and trademark process that is slowing us down and is not assisting us with getting our protection for our ideas. We can look at AI, for example, in another public sector efficiency program using traffic. I know my traffic has gone down significantly because we're not in school anymore, but once we get back to school, we're going to have that gridlock again. So how can AI help us with figuring out a more efficient way to manage our traffic on our islands, especially because we have too many cars and we don't have enough land space. So how can we enable AI to look at that? And of course, how can AI be implemented to develop our predictive capabilities for emergency response? How could AI have been implemented to help with our volcano in St. Vincent and our emergency response for that? And we need to probably look at how we enable the whole aspect of citizen services in the very first step of dealing with a ministry, for example, using AI assistance. For example, we have a lot of websites up, which were a output of maybe our first public sector transformation processes. But what I've noticed is that those websites are not up to date. They do not integrate some of the latest technology. So how can we take maybe website 1.0 that a ministry has inputted and use artificial intelligence and some new technologies to make the customer experience a lot more smooth and a lot more automated? And what we want to go for is to reduce the number of people that have to come into our service sectors. I am sensitive to the fact that we have lots of people working in jobs that they really can't afford to take time off. So we shouldn't be having people waiting in lines for hours. That means that they're not making money. That means that they're not feeding their families. So how do we make our interaction with our public sector the most efficient that we can? How do we start to implement some of these assistance so that we can reduce the interaction that we have inside of some of these ministries? And of course, we're going to have to figure out how we retain our talent, because as soon as we start implementing some of these programs, we're going to lose talent. The public sector will lose talent potentially. Okay, this other big area that we need to focus on transformation, and this to me, if we don't have this, we're not really in this AI. We're not in this digital market that is so flourishing all around us. And this is our infrastructure, our smart island infrastructure. And I want us to think about maybe a collaborative approach, and we'll start from the bottom, in establishing a secure regional computing cloud. A lot of people are using cloud as a way to reduce costs, and we're using Amazon and Azure and all these great other platforms, and that's wonderful, but we need to have our own cloud be resident here in our region, and we really should have all of our islands have access to leveraging that cloud so that we can keep our data and information in the region. We need to establish our infrastructure, our internet infrastructure. We need to make sure that we're having penetration on all of the islands. And we really, if we're doing this smart and we can leapfrog, because we don't have to go serial, we don't have to go from 2G to 3G to 4G, we can make a distinct call that says we're going to go to the future now. And we're going to enable every island in our region to have access to the 5G technology that's coming out. And we're going to make sure that everybody has access to a level of quality broadband. That is something that we don't have in the region. And in many places, I read the average, we're about 50% penetrated across the region. That means 50% of our people don't have access to the internet. And the internet in the future is a human right. So we got to figure out how we're addressing that, that issue. We need data centers as well. As data becomes more important, we need secure storage platforms. Where are we going to keep all of this data and information? We need data hubs aligned with our tertiary institutions to facilitate research and development and promote AI innovation. So we're going to have more collaboration with our tertiary sector around the region. We have lots of different participants, and we need to have a more coordinated approach in relation to artificial intelligence. We should also be thinking about data banks. It's a newer concept, but it's a concept where we can aggregate our unique data into a location where people can go and request our data. And it can be trusted data, right? So if someone wants to do some training data, they can go to the data bank, request the data, and know that the data is accurate, it's representative of our context, because that's the problem right now. If we want to train on Caribbean-specific data today, where do we go? Where's the place that I go and get that data? We don't have a place, so we need to establish a place. And with that, we've got to have these governance strategies around how we're going to structure the data and how we're going to license it. We need new business models around licensing of the data. Maybe that's something that we can think about here in the Caribbean. We're very innovative and very entrepreneurial. How would we license our data to people around the world that may want to use it? So in this area of transformation, it's going to be very important that this is really driven by the public sector. I think a lot of the public sector transformation will drive private sector transformation and efficiency, because the private sector should be looking to help our public sector implement a ton of these programs. So we need to be pushing for the digital transformation of the region. We need our infrastructure set up. And I think this is a place where we can all collaborate together. This may be AI 1.0. We don't have AI if we don't have broadband. We don't have AI if we don't have data centers. We don't have AI if we're not having collaboration. So how do we look at making sure that we can start from our foundation level of making sure that we have those things in place so that we can participate in the global AI market? Okay, that's for number 3. I'll pause right there, Sasha, to see what questions we have.
Yes, the discussion continues in the chat. Persons are seemingly identifying digital literacy as a key component for building that foundation or infrastructure development for AI transformation in the region. So they've relocated the idea here. Also, we've received this comment before, but we also get, again, data protection as important for infrastructure, data protection policies. And then this final question, which is in the chat, and they're still having a discussion about it as we speak, is what is Caribbean data? Do we know, and what language is it in? So there's a discussion happening right now, so we can, I guess, explore that now.
Okay, great. That's awesome data. We'll note we have a whole section on upskilling and education. So that's going to be important, not just in the public sector transformation, but across the board in our citizens. So we'll go to that next. That's actually the next principle, which is upskilling. And I think there is some conversation in that about the last comment that we talked about. So we'll explore that next. Let's look at our next principle, which is upskilling. So this is a very important principle because we won't be able to do any of this unless we get our population, our people transformed to be participants in this future. So under upskilling, we have two sections. We have a section on innovation and we have a section on monetization. So under innovation, we want to look at establishing AI incentives for academia and the private sector. So we need to do education campaigns, both in our academic arena and in the private and public sector. So how do we have incentives to make sure that we can get people to upskill, we can get people to train on these new jobs that we're having? There are some important target audiences because of some unique circumstances in the region that we want to focus on. We're knowing outside of COVID, lots of research coming out that women are being disproportionately disadvantaged by the pandemic because a lot of women had to quit their jobs, leave the workforce to take care of their families at home. Youth have also been just affected tremendously, and our disabled population. So how can we target them for upskilling in this next new phase, right? We need public education and media literacy and information campaigns. We do, just like the video that the Broadcasting Commission showed in the beginning, we need a lot of content. I think what's really interesting about this, though, is we can use our creative industries to help us tell our story. Why wouldn't we use our creative people to help tell the story about artificial intelligence? We'll be getting a double duty for that. We will be getting to take advantage of their wonderful talents, and we'll also be educating them about the future, because once they learn about what's happening in AI and how it can be applied to their industry, I think it would be very valuable. We had a notion as well about creating a regional R&D fund for artificial intelligence. So each country contribute, and we have a regional fund. We'll work with academia, the private sector, to come up with projects that we can fund. Some of those projects can be targeted at our public sector transformation. So what sort of AI tools could we create and fund and deploy in the region? We also need to look at new industries that may be within our grasp now, because we have access to AI and technology. So this cannabis thing is huge all over the world. Why are we not taking advantage of it in the region? Come on, we have to figure out, can we use AI to help us to get into this industry? We're a little bit late, but can we use AI to help us to develop a medical cannabis industry or region in the Caribbean? Huge, huge opportunities in e-health. Healthcare is transforming. COVID will drive a ton of investment in the healthcare sector. And already, we have already seen, and they already are crediting the fact that we have vaccines now for COVID that were developed using artificial intelligence. We would never have these vaccines out on the market today if we didn't develop that technology, if we didn't leverage AI. So we can see the tremendous impact that artificial intelligence is having on our healthcare sector. We need to transform our education sector. Oh my God, how could we use AI now out of the pandemic? Number one, to deal with our learning loss. Can we use AI to evaluate our students? What has this year at home done to them, right? How can we use AI to catch them up, to close the gap on the learning loss? These are areas that I think we have to look at. There is new industry sector called esports. And with all of our prowess in this area of sporting in the region, and due to our creative abilities, we should be looking at that as a industry that we want to develop. I don't know why we would never go into that industry, because we're already so well known for our sporting prowess. Mariculture, agriculture, regenerative agriculture, We're going to have to look to see how we are going to deal with our food supply and food security. So how can we use AI to look at new ways of dealing with our food that we have in the area? We have a massive import bill. So we really need to be looking at how we can implement AI to lower that bill, because hopefully those savings can go into more important areas like our education or lowering poverty. We've been known for well-being in the area, in the region. People come to the Caribbean to get spiritual enlightenment, to relax. Can we use AI to turn that into an industry? We know that there's so much unwellness in the world right now. Can we use our tourism sector that we have, artificial intelligence, to create kind of a new category of tourism, which is well-being management? These are areas that we have to start looking at, especially as we look to the future, to our development of our region. We have to look to new industry sectors that are enabled with artificial intelligence. And of course, across our existing industry sectors, we have to implement AI to improve innovation. In the manufacturing sector, how can we use AI to become, better, more efficient, save money, save costs, to come up with new products, for example? The top tier of manufacturers in the region are already implementing versions of AI and small implementations of AI, but we have to figure out how we get AI in our tier 2, our tier 3 manufacturers and our supply chain, our smaller manufacturers, who frankly could benefit greatly from the implementation of that technology. Financial services, our creative industries, my God, we have got to put AI in our creative industries to help our artisans, our craft people have better management of the creation of their artwork. Maybe we could look to see how we can leverage AI in their supply chain to make their distribution or the transportation of their product more efficient. The creative industries is really ripe for the implementation of AI. And then how do we monetize? We having all of these new skills, we're developing our new industry. How do we definitely turn that into some monetization? Very specifically, there is a need around the world for bias testing of AI systems. And I think what came out in the consultations is that we're a very diverse region. We got lots of different ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds. And so we have an advantage potentially in spotting bias in software. So maybe that's an industry sector we can develop here and monetize to test for bias in algorithms. The other area that I think is really big as well is right now, we don't have very efficient ways to train algorithms. They use an extensive amount of processing and energy resources. And so the industry, global industry, is looking for better ways to be able to train algorithms that use less energy, that don't contribute to climate change and carbon emissions, because right now those training of those systems is very energy intensive. It's one of the actual downsides of artificial intelligence and the industry. So it is, in a way, contributing to climate change. So we have to figure out how to stem that tide. There's a lot of money in fixing that problem. Okay, let's see. So how do we then also look at augmented reality experiences? That's how we can monetize these new skill sets that we have. And then we have to develop mentoring, training, and potentially some accelerator programs that are very focused on women, very focused on youth, very focused on disabled people. How do we implement those programs so that we can come out of this developing new products, developing new wealth, transforming our industries, increasing our efficiency and our productivity, enhancing our customer service. The customer service that we have in the tourism sector, let's take that and horizontal across every single industry. We have an issue with customer service. I think that we can leverage our best practices, world-renowned, globally known for our service in the tourism sector, and see how we can bottle that and transform that and put that into our other sector. This is going to be money, increasing trade, and we have an opportunity in knowledge services and translation services on the knowledge services side. One of our speakers, Professor Anthony Clayton, talked about knowledge services as being a weightless export, and I love that definition. It means that we have a real advantage in that industry. It's not as capital intensive and resource intensive as some of our other traditional industries, so we should definitely be looking at how we are developing our knowledge services. Okay, this is the area of upskilling. Anything else to add here? Did we leave anything off? We're looking at targeting various populations. We need media and information literacy campaigns. We have to get our academia and our private sector working closer together. Maybe there are some tech funds, some accelerator programs we can deploy in this area. Comments, Sasha, on upskilling, innovation, or monetization in this area?
I think there was a comment related to the creative industries, and it really was just a question that virtual carnival happened this year, and if that counts as AI, and it's kind of along the lines of what are those specific opportunities for persons who are not familiar with AI, maybe explaining what those opportunities might be and differentiating for those non-traditional AI audiences. And then I just want to remind everyone that we have these forms available. If you are unable to comment at this time or would prefer to do so afterwards, you can go ahead and add your comment over by the form.
Erica, just a point though, on that question of the virtual carnival. I'm not sure whether it was a bit tongue-in-cheek in the sense that you can have a virtual carnival that has that has very little to do with artificial intelligence. Well, the qualifier that came after relates to the principle of trust. And I recall that this came up in one of the earlier sessions, and particularly in the Caribbean, where we, like the rest of the globe, people are increasingly distrusting of institutions. The UN Secretary General actually has highlighted that, a trust deficit as a real issue. And so we are being cautioned here against technological determinism. I think that's what I saw coming out of the chat, which is, look, it's artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology. It will enhance human well-being, but the human-centric approach requires us to dial down, to tone down the almost godlike, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent characteristics. So I thought it was just a comment that was being made that probably is pointing us to go back to the principles and to really spell out some more the trust principle. And earlier to someone had commented, I thought it was Isabel, that it would be very good when we start the governance to expressly go to UNESCO's Rome principles, and she told us what that stands for, including multi-stakeholderism, emphasizing rights and openness and that kind of thing. So that's how I interpreted Deirdre's comment, and she's writing in the chat that she's agreeing.
Okay, great. All right, the Rome Principle is discussed in our paper. We did start from all of the UNESCO guiding principles, and you'll see that very clearly in our paper. I just wanted to comment on just making sure that we're thinking in the broadest sense about artificial intelligence. I wanted to say, when I think about virtual carnivals, right? I'm thinking about the back end side of the execution of this event. And how can we use AI to save money on the execution, not necessarily on the pageantry and the whole creative side. And this is what speaks to our creative industries. How do we use this technology to save money and make more money, not necessarily infringe on the creative side of our industry, but making it more efficient? Our industries here in the Caribbean are very inefficient. So if we could look at AI in that way on the back end operations, how do we save money in executing that virtual carnival, which I'm sure cost a lot of money to execute, even in its virtual sense, because you have to have all of the pageantry digitized. So on the industry side, let's just be very broad and open about when we're talking about AI. AI is not, it could be an efficiency program that we're implementing in our supply chain. It could be a data collection program that is going to save us money with our suppliers. So let's just keep the definition very big about how we can use AI as an efficiency lever in business. Okay, now let's go to the next one, which is going to have a lot to do with our creative industries as well. So I'm looking forward to getting your feedback on our next principle, which has to do with preservation. This was an important topic that came out in all of our stakeholder consultations, and we have a very unique culture here in the Caribbean that we have, that we want to preserve. And we want to preserve, and we want to see if there is a way that we can turn that into a way that benefits all of us. So in this area of preservation, we are looking at how we are going to capture all of our national and how we can launch national and regional preservation programs, right? How do we establish these data banks for data capture? And then how do we retain youth, women, and disabled people to handle data and information? And you're probably asking me what type of data? We have lots of data here. We have flora and fauna data that is unique to our region. We have cultural data, folklore, we have music, we have a lot of information, artwork, knowledge that is not digitized yet. So can we launch some preservation programs? We all have national archives, which are full to the hilt with all of our historical, important cultural aspects. Those are still analog. So how do we turn all of those things that we have in our national archives into digital assets? That's a job, that's a very specific new job that I totally think that youth, creatives, women, disabled people can participate in. This area of preservation really is about democratization of the digital environment, because we don't want for example, you don't have to have a PhD in analytics or in artificial intelligence to go out and do participate in a preservation program, right? So how do we make sure that we have the broadest participation across all of our citizens in this digital future? And I think this preservation initiative is in a very important way that we can kind of get everybody involved. We need to clean public data. I talked about a lot of public data that we have that is not in the right format. We have, for example, in Jamaica, we have an open data portal, which has been up for a couple of years. But if you go into data, if you go in the portal, first of all, it's not updated. I don't know, it's not updated. Secondly, the data that you find in there is not in machine readable format, which is what we need for our AI systems. So there's lots of work that we have in taking our existing assets, our National Archive assets, our publicly available information assets, and organizing, cleaning it, classifying it, labeling it, so that it can be used as a part of our digital future. And in that, we can definitely train youth, creatives, women, disabled people in these archival and data cleaning techniques This is a new job for the future. So we talk about transforming new jobs. This is a new job. Once we have that information, and this is digital data, accurate digital data, then we can talk about how we monetize it, how we create these augmented reality experiences. And for me, what stood out was a presentation that we had from Kingston Creative here in Kingston. And they are actually mapping our capital here in Kingston using a bunch of AI-related tool sets to create these augmented reality experiences. I think that we should launch a project to have 3D mapping of our Caribbean, small island, developing states capitals. And we want to go for cultural, historical, social, and environmental preservation. This is new jobs. This is how we create the new jobs. This is can also be tied to our public sector transformation, because a lot of these assets that we already have are assets of the state. So we're looking at how we can use AI to preserve our very special culture that we have identified for us here in the region. Comments, questions on preservation?
Just a few. Deidre has asked, should we be concerned about the rapid obsolescence of digital formats? And then commented also that labeling could be a major hurdle unless it's carefully controlled. And then Shireen said that preservation is linked to resilience, and also that community participation in data acquisition for monitoring processes and for preservation should be something we consider. Those are the comments so far.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, the data, the community has to be involved in this. This is how we democratize it. Because if we keep it at the academic level, you're not going to get full society participation. What we're trying to do with this preservation principle is to make sure that people understand the importance of data and understand the importance of our Caribbean data that we have here, the uniqueness of it, and to preserve it in the right way. Of course, any classification, labeling, archival, management will have to have a framework that we're going to be guiding people to follow. And in that case, we can also use artificial intelligence to make sure that the data is labeled in the right way and is ready to be consumed. But I believe that this is a great way for us to be able to get everybody involved in understanding digital and why our unique data here in the Caribbean is important. What was the question that Deidre asked?
The question was, should we be concerned about the rapid obsolescence of digital format?
I would say no, Deidre, not necessarily. What we should be concerned with is making sure that we get the data in a digital format. We have lots of data that's not in digital. Tons of technologies that will manage the transition through generations of technology. And they're working on a lot of integration technology that would help there. I think we need to focus on capturing the data and getting it first in a digital format. And then we can begin to then work with it, evolve it, transform it into different formats and things. So that's what this effort is on democratizing the capture, preservation, and monetization of our unique cultural, historical, social, and environmental data that we have in the Caribbean. And as I spoke about earlier, said on Jamaican history. Where do I get that data set from? Does any country have a body, a ministry focused on data and information and whether or not it could be accessed if it's in the right format? I think we need to put focus on that. So we have to focus. We won't be able to monetize until we organize around this concept of data and information. Any other comments before we go to our last?
No further comments.
area?
No further comments.
Okay.
We just encourage everyone to use the forms available. We're at our last point and we are almost at the end, so let's proceed.
All right, thank you, Sasha. Okay, so we are at our last principle. And our last principle has to do with sustainability, the elusive word and that we have, and it's sustainable development, sustainability. How do we use to achieve our sustainable development? And here you see here, we've started very deliberately at the top that says that AI has to be in service of humanity to help us get to our sustainable development goals. And we want to use AI as a tool for that. So how do we do that? We've got to do, we can leverage, for example, human assets that we have. We had a comment in our last meeting about disabled people and some of the abilities, the unique abilities that they have that could potentially contribute here. One of the speakers talked about blind people having excellent auditory capability. So we know that voice and voice data, auditory data is a growing area of artificial intelligence. We're talking to Siri every day. So could we use some of their experiences, some of their talents in this area and of voice or auditory technologies for AI? So we can look at being very creative about leveraging our human assets, our assets in our national archives, and establishing a network so that we can govern the use of AI in service to our region and to humanity. The other goal, the section here in sustainability is really about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And, you know, all of us should be aware of those goals. I talk about them every time I speak to students. Anybody that wants to find out about what they should do with their life, I talk about a big picture and say we've got some important challenges that we all need to solve. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals are an important target for us here in the region. And how can we apply AI to deal with, for example, Sustainable Goal number 1, which has to do with poverty, Sustainable Development Goal number 8, that has to do with decent work and economic growth. Number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Number 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. So those are still development goals that are very elusive to us in the region. I don't see another way for us to be able to really attack those at the moment, but for using AI as that tool right now to see what efficiencies we can get in solving those problems. And we can use AI to look at how we're going to reduce poverty in the region. How are we going to enable clean energy? Because we know that AI is going to be used in the microgrids of the future. Elon Musk is doing that now. His systems, his energy systems have AI deployed throughout. And then how do we use AI to close our gender gap? So this is the areas that we have for the global goals, for sustainability, and we really wanted to focus on how we use AI to help us get to that sustainable development state. So that is it for number 6. Do we have any other comments, Sasha, Mr. Green? Anybody from the audience, do you have any comments at this time? Any final comments? It's not final because you still get to give your feedback on the form and you still get to tell us where you think that we need to look at and pay a little bit more attention to.
I think those are the operative words, Erica, that the process continues, although we are wanting to bring it to an end sooner rather than later. So we invite persons to make their comments I know we had far more persons on the call than those who participated. We are not, as we said in the earlier session, treating silence as consent, but as the other C, which is contemplation. But we ask if you could make your comments within the next 7 days. And we want to hear your comments on the substantive paper, which had been circulated, guided by this excellent presentation by Erica this afternoon. I thought the comments were very instructive. We want to reiterate that it's a human-centric approach that we have embraced. So in a sense, we have rejected technological determinism. So whatever we say is to be received in that spirit. We are really wanting to look at the opportunity that we have to deploy artificial intelligence in a way that leads to sustainability and doesn't result in us being at the end of another significant wave of human development. So we are fully embracing artificial intelligence, but we are doing so within the context of UNESCO's omni-stakeholder, human-centric approach. But again, Erica, we have been at this since 8 o'clock this morning. Deidre said that is an achievement in itself to be doing 3 consecutive presentations. We have been with you, but you have been the one doing the heavy lifting. So thank you very much for that. And as always, Isabel Vera, who doesn't like some officials come on at 8 o'clock, make some nice comments and then disappear. We know she has a very busy schedule, so we don't take it for granted that she has spent her time with us as well as Paula. So I give you the last words, Isabel Vera.
Thank you, Cordell. It was actually been really very interesting to be with all of you today, and I did was paying attention to all the different comments and also chats and everything. I believe it was a very interesting and I may I say that this was also a very provoking workshops. I mean, for our thoughts, I'm sure that we will be all humbling about this maybe for a while today, and then when we make our contributions through the forums. So I think I want to thank the Broadcasting Commission, again, Cordell, your excellent team for this work that has been done so far. And a big thanks and congrats to Ms. Erica Simmons. You have done an excellent job, Erica. Thank you so much. And I think that's it. We have been attending the workshop since early in the morning, as you mentioned, Cordell, and we are just looking forward to the updated draft that incorporates the critical relevant inputs emanating from the discussions that we had today. So thank you, and thanks to all the participants for their very relevant contributions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day, all.
Bye.